searching history for buried classics. This is Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Welcome everybody to episode number 5 of Lost Treasures of Gaming. I am your host, Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion Tane.
And I am your other host, Sid Bolton, also known as Dirk the Daring, and I'm also your gaming archaeologist on the OMG Hour.
Yes, you are. Sid, who are we going to call this week?
I think we're going to call Ghostbusters all the way back to 2009.
Yes, we are, because it was a fabulous game. And, I was actually surprised you picked it as a Lost Treasure because it was such a great game, I figured everybody played it.
Well, the game did sell around 1 million copies, which is considered a moderate success, but that was across a lot of platforms. And so a lot of people may have missed this game. It didn't do quite as well as I think the publisher had hoped and expected to, but if you did miss it, it's something that you should definitely pick up, and it's something that'll still run on most modern systems that we'll have around, and even better, we have someone who actually worked on the game to talk about it.
Yes, we do. We're going to be talking tonight with Ken Rogoway, who was the lead engineer on this very game. And you know what? Ken actually has a very special link to our Lost Treasures from last week.
Yes, he does. He was involved in Rescue on Fractalus, which was what we talked about last week. So we'll find out exactly what his connection to that game is as well when we talk to him. Absolutely.
So without further ado, here is Ken Rogoway, the lead engineer on Ghostbusters, the video game.
So we're talking to Ken Rogoway, and I'm assuming that I'm saying that correctly, Ken. Correct me if I'm wrong. But you've done a lot of interesting things, had a very interesting career in video games, and we wanted to talk to you at first here about Rescue on Fractalus, because in last week's episode we actually talked to David Fox, who was on the original design team of that software. Now, I understand that you were responsible for one of the translations of that program. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was asked at Epix to port it over to the Technicolor computer.
And how was it working with that machine? Did you find it, because I would say compared to some of the other machines that particular software was on, I think the Coco was a little bit less powerful. Would you say that's true, or more powerful in certain aspects and less powerful in others?
Well, so I was taking the 6502 code from the Apple II and porting that over to the Technicolor computer, which uses a 6809. And in a lot of ways, it was actually a little bit more powerful. It had 16-bit index registers, a nice stack that you could actually put your graphics data on. So there were some advantages to it, but it was totally new for me at the time. I kind of was thrown in on the project. The person who'd been working on the conversion had spent 6 or 8 weeks and hadn't really gotten very far. And so first thing as a contractor there, they asked me to jump in and help out.
Now, your experience prior to that, would you say the first platform you developed for was the VIC-20? Is that correct?
First platform was the Commodore 64.
Okay.
And that was when I was working on Spitball. And then partway through the development of that, they needed a port to the VIC-20 to take the C64 version of Crisis Mountain and get it to fit over into the VIC-20, which had its own challenges.
So you're already familiar with the 6502 architecture, which is the processor, essentially, that was in the 64 and the VIC-20. And actually, Spitball was how you and I first connected, because I was adding that to the museum collection, and I was trying to find you. I was thinking, I wonder if the developer of this is still around. So, and that was a number of years ago. So it's nice to be able to actually speak with you and hear your voice, because of course all of our communication has been electronic up to this point. So, and so Creative Software, was that like the first? Would you say the first video game company that you worked for then?
That's correct.
And then you moved on to doing stuff with Epix. Did you do anything else with Epix, or was it just that conversion?
No, I started on Rescue on Fractalus, converted Coronis Rift as well to the Tandy Color computer, and then I was one of a couple guys that kept pushing to develop games on the PC, because up to that point, nobody was really doing much in terms of gaming on the PC. When I say PC, I mean the original IBM PC
Right.
XT. And so I was able to convince them to go ahead and let us develop or port California games over to the PC. And so
what a great game that was.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was one of, I think, 4 engineers, and there were about 3 or 4 artists that worked on that port to the PC.
And for those that don't know, Coronis Rift was also an early Lucasfilm game, as well as the Eidolon, as well as another one that was sort of, and Rescue on Fractalus. Those 3 were sort of the initial ones, and of course Ball Blazer as well. We can't forget that one. That's a great one too. So those are all those early games before Lucasfilm games became LucasArts, and before all of the graphic adventures started to come out. Now, now tonight we're going to focus a little bit more on a project that you did in 2009, but did you stay in the video game industry? Because obviously the Rescue on Fractalus and that stuff was in the early 80s. Did you stay making games between the 80s and up to this 2009 project we're going to talk about in a second?
I kind of bounced in and out of game development. In the mid 80s to the early 90s, I was doing other projects, just other software development, nothing really much to do with games. And then in the early 90s, I had worked at Symantec and decided that just really wasn't the kind of work I wanted to do. So I started my own small studio, homebrew software, and developed a couple side scrollers. And also, this was back in the heyday of shareware. So I was distributing a lot of shareware software for a German partner, and he was distributing my products over there in Europe.
And so the game that we were doing as a lost treasure this week is Ghostbusters, the video game from 2009. How did you get involved in that project, and what did you do on it?
Sure. So late 2006, I was at LucasArts working on Star Wars: The Force Unleashed, and my family was still out here in Texas. And previously, I'd worked with Terminal Reality on a couple projects, Blood Ring 2 and Eon Flux, and they kept trying to get me to come back. And of course, my wife wanted me to come back because she didn't want to move to the Bay Area. So they ultimately convinced me to come back here to Texas and work on at the time that I agreed to, it was a secret project, and then once I came back, I found out that it was Ghostbusters.
So you didn't even know when they said, come on back, you had no idea what the project was.
That's correct.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, they were pretty tight-lipped about it. So I came back, I think September of 2006, and worked on Ghostbusters until August of 2008. So I wasn't there for the shipment of the product in 2009. That had a lot to do with management kept saying, and the whole schedule said that we have to ship in August of 2008. It's a drop dead date. You've heard this in the industry a million times, but they were so emphatic about it. And with some of the issues that they'd had during development, I felt like it was probably better for me to move on at the end of the project, but I wanted to see the project out. So I found something that would start at the end of August, since that's when they kept saying the drop dead date was. But So, ultimately I didn't stay through to the shipment of the product, but I was lead engineer during the 18 months.
And what exactly does a lead engineer do? So what was your specific duties on Ghostbusters?
Well, as a lead on a team of engineers, about 7 engineers, so a fairly small team for console development. And it was quite varied in terms of the responsibilities, everything from interfacing with third-party partners for like the multiplayer portion, to just dealing with other teams, the art team, animation team, sound team, internally in the company, to picking up little pieces of the project that we just didn't have the manpower for, which included things like doing an automated build system or doing language localizations, what you would kind of consider as low as in more junior level type work, but it was stuff that needed to get done, and that's what happens a lot of times on a small team. The lead ends up picking up the slack.
And did you get to, like, in terms of how the game developed and progressed, did you get to work with any of the people like Dan Aykroyd or any of the cast that was in it at all, or did that stuff just get all done in another place and then shipped back to you guys to work with?
Yeah, one of the team members, the creative director, Drew, he got to work pretty closely with them, working on the script and then their modifications to the script for the dialogue. And the rest of us were kind of kept away from that because, let's just say some of the personalities involved weren't real big on getting a lot of external input, so they wanted to minimize that as much as possible and keep it to just one person.
Right. And in the end, you said that you didn't stay with it to the end, but how do you personally feel about how the end product turned out and how it was received by game players?
Well, yeah, I have mixed feelings. I mean, every project I've worked on, I take a lot of pride in. And the team that I worked with, we all put in a lot of effort for it. So in some ways it's frustrating when you see the end result and it's not quite what you want, but in other ways you look at it and you say, given all of the constraints that we had, given the time frames we had, and a lot of things that aren't public knowledge and, that didn't go external, we actually put together a pretty good product. So we weren't shooting for it to be like a 90 Metacritic score. It wasn't trying to be a top AAA game. It was supposed to be a AAA game. But the plan was, from the beginning, was not that it would necessarily be the highest ranking game. It was just that it was going to do the IP justice, and that the players would hopefully enjoy a lot of elements of the gameplay and how that translated from, the original movies to the game.
Yeah, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed the Ghostbusters game. It's one of the games still sitting on my shelf that I'd never get rid of. Really loved playing it. Now, you mentioned something about that when it was done, it wasn't quite the game that you had originally planned. Can you talk about some of the stuff that maybe didn't make it into the game that you kind of were hoping to?
There were some. Yeah, I'd like to be a little careful just because I don't really want to disparage anybody, but I'll say just in general that there were some design ideas that I think got a little overly ambitious and spiraled out of control, and then they had to be reined back in. And to that extent, some of the ideas that we had in other areas of the game could have probably been fleshed out a little bit better, but they weren't because of time constraints, because we ate up a lot of time trying to go down certain paths that didn't prove, fruitious. So, yeah.
Now, the original Ghostbusters video game was a David Crane game, which, of course, David Crane, one of the founders of Activision, and also creator of one of my early favorites, which is Pitfall, which I blame for my obsession with video game collecting today. But now that game, from what I understand, started out as a different game, and then it ended up being a Ghostbusters game sort of after the obviously the license became available, and it was one of those things that Activision sort of jumped on. Obviously, I would think with this game, it was designed from the very beginning to be a Ghostbusters game. Do you feel now that that we've unfortunately, we've lost Egon, and so there's been talk about revisiting the franchise and now a female cast with Ghostbusters? Like, to me, the game that you worked on, the 2009 Ghostbusters video game, sort of represents, I think, the closest thing that we would have to a third movie with the original cast. Do you feel that way as well? And do you think that the game may receive a lot more attention now that sort of, obviously 2009, it's been done for quite a while and sort of out of the mainstream? Do you think the game will get more of a cult following for that reason alone?
I do think that's the case. When we were developing the game, one of the things that did come back to us in conversations with the creative director and Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray was that they really felt like this was their opportunity to have their sequel, because at the time they weren't sure that they, if there would ever be another Ghostbusters movie that they would all be in or whatever. So this was an opportunity, and try not to quote me on that, but that's the impression that our team was given from conversations that had been had. So we took it as our opportunity to kind of do the IP justice and try and, put together a product that would be as if it was a movie, obviously in video game format, but as if it was a movie with those people. So.
Yeah, and I remember even back then reading that this, Dan Aykroyd considered this to be Ghostbusters 3.
Right.
Right. So
yeah,
that was a known thing, I think, back then when the game came out, was you want to go, like, we may not be making a third movie, but this game is as close as you're going to get to Ghostbusters 3.
Okay, so the external message was very consistent with what we were hearing internally.
Yeah, I remember hearing that a lot. And I mean, it's certainly a great story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I loved the effects, how the streams, when you shoot them on a wall, it actually burns the wall. And I have a photo of my television where I actually burned my name into a wall using the gun. Because it was just too much fun.
Yeah.
So you said you were not at the company when the game shipped.
Correct.
That's correct. But did you play the game once it released?
I did play the game after it released, and I didn't play it all the way through because during development I played almost the entire game so many times during development.
Of course.
So there may be some portions of the shipped product that I still haven't seen, but a lot of what I did see in the shipped product is very similar, although a lot more polished than during the time I was working on it.
Okay, so there was no surprises for you after you left that they had thrown in and that you didn't know about? You'd pretty much already seen it all anyway.
Correct.
Yeah, that's very awesome.
Is there any one particular part of the game that stands out to you in your mind as something that is your favorite part, or something that you're really happy did make it into the game? Or is there anything that, when you think back about the project, you said you take pride in what you do, is there any particular thing that stands out to you as being something that was above and beyond for you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, being a fan of Ghostbusters and then having an opportunity to work on a product where you can, get the feeling using the controller that you're wrangling ghosts, that you're wrangling girders, to break them away from the wall. The library fight is one that kind of stands out. It's not the only part of the whole game, but it was one of those things that I think translated pretty well from the movie concept and into the video game. The battle outside in the streets, that also I think did pretty well. So
yeah. So you just mentioned that you're a Ghostbusters fan, but when you were convinced to go back to Texas, it was Texas, you said, right?
Yeah.
To work on a game. how ecstatic were you then to find out this was going to be a Ghostbusters game?
Oh, I thought it was awesome. I mean, coming off Star Wars and then finding out that I was going to work on Ghostbusters, it's like, okay, here's one great IP to another. You know?
Yeah. So you're probably wondering, why didn't you just say this sooner? I'd have been here 3 months ago.
Yeah, exactly. Had they told me up front, yeah, I would have been there much sooner.
Yeah, there'd have been no decision, right?
Right. I was busy worrying about little details and, everything from salary and starting times and making sure I was able to hand off the work that I was doing at Lucas and all that. And I'm not saying I wouldn't have been professional, but I probably would have been much more eager to leave much sooner.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
So after Ghostbusters, you went to work on another project. Did you stay working with games, or have you stayed working with games since 2009, or did you change to something else?
Well, it's a slightly different industry from about 2000, the end of 2008 until about the start of 2012, and that was slot machines, video games, video slot games is what I mean. And the company that I've been working at for this last 7 years, I had the opportunity to sell the owner on the idea of doing those on mobile devices as well. So they were actually in casinos. I was doing Class 3 development, so for casinos, Indian reservation type casinos, etc. And then had the opportunity to sell him on doing them for iPhone, iPad, Android, and Amazon platforms. And then we've more recently done a sort of a bug squasher type, it has nothing to do with bugs, but game, so nothing to do with casino either. So we're kind of trying to get back to our roots of game development, and the slot game business has been very good to me. It's been a nice change of pace, much faster iterations instead of 18-month to 24-month projects. We're doing games in 2 months, 3 months. But of course, I'm a gamer at heart, so I want to get back to game development.
And you've been doing it since 1982, and whether it's been on and off, you've definitely been working in games for a long time. So it's interesting to see that your career has gone the way it has, but you're kind of back to, and not necessarily where you started, but in the sense of the length of development cycle and things like that. And obviously, because in 82, 83, games were often done in a matter of months sometimes, and of course with much smaller teams. So, looking back at your career, I mean, if anyone looks at your Moby Games page, that sort of shows that the games that you've worked on, and we've mentioned a number of them tonight, including California Games, Corona's Rift. You mentioned Eon Flux, Blood Rain. You also worked on the Terminator: Dawn of Fate. Is there one game, in all the ones that you've worked on, that sort of stands out for you as your favorite, or the one that you kind of, when you think about your career overall, that is sort of a high point for you personally?
I actually have two different answers depending on which way you ask that question.
Okay.
You phrased it two ways. So in terms of a high point for my career, I would definitely say, if you're looking at it in terms of the game that I worked on, the IP, and the amount of involvement I had, it would be Ghostbusters. I felt very involved on a daily basis in that project. And then the other one that I'm really proud of is Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. That had more to do with taking a small team, growing it up to a much larger team to handle a big, huge project, massive IP, George Lucas involved, all that. So it's two different sides of development, and there's the part of me that's sort of the lead or manager side, and that is the part that is very proud of the work I did on Star Wars. And then there's a part of me that's the gamer, the developer side, and that's the part of me that's very proud of Ghostbusters.
So now that indie gaming is coming back in a big big way, with all of the engines, most of the engines being free to use. Will we see some more Ken Rogoway games soon?
You definitely will. Just now starting a side company, side profit with the blessing of the owner here, to develop some console games for like Live, Xbox Live, PSN, and then possibly Steam, etc. So, and these are probably going to be 8 to 12 month projects. So not, these are like $9.99 titles in Xbox Live Store.
Okay. Yeah.
To give you a sense. So.
Awesome. And anything you can talk about at all, or is it all still in the planning stages?
It's still in the planning stages, so it'd be a little premature to talk about it, and then, of course, have people point at it later and go, that's not at all what you did. So.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair enough. Awesome. I'm glad to see that the Moby Games page for you is actually incorrect, because it actually says Ken is no longer working in the game industry, and clearly you are.
Right.
So.
Well, some people don't feel that mobile games are really games unless it's a port of a big, huge title or something, or, EA's putting out a game, then of course they'll call it a game. But smaller projects, they often don't think of as game development, and I totally disagree. I mean, that's how this industry was started.
Yes.
Some very small indie type games, done in 1 to 2 months with 1 to 2 people. That's how I got my start at Creative Software. And I really enjoy the smaller team sizes. Everybody has a sense of ownership. Everybody has a sense of involvement in the project. And people can look at things in the game and point to them and say, I worked on that. I did that. I'm proud of that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
when you're on a team of 150 people, you're kind of hard-pressed to do that.
Yeah.
Now, and just wrapping up and going back to kind of the beginning of your career, and I don't know if you want to actually say this or not, because I know this is something you've told me in our previous conversations, but this has always stuck with me. You almost had, in a way, a very short career in video games, and do you want to tell people maybe what your exit from Creative Software was, or the reason why you stopped working at Creative Software? And assuming that it's the same thing that you mentioned to me and that you want to say, because I've always found it very interesting how you ended up leaving that company.
Yeah, it was an interesting situation. Basically, what happened was, I was working at Creative Software and my car was stolen. I won't go into names, but it was somebody I knew stole my car. I had no transportation. I tried getting, I did not live geographically near the office, and so I tried to get there via buses, but it would, ended up being quite a bit. 2 hours each way on buses, and so unfortunately I had to pass and leave that opportunity that I was enjoying so much, and it was not really by choice. This wasn't, I was young at the time. This isn't a case of, I'm an adult now, and if somebody stole my car, I'd just go file with the insurance company. They'd give me a loaner, and I knew nothing about the world at the time. So when I didn't have a car, it was like, well, I don't have any way to get into work. What do I do? So.
But you stuck with it, and at least with the industry, and that's great. And you were able to contribute to the Ghostbusters 2009 video game, which is a great game and something that I personally appreciate. We're actually doing a Ghostbusters themed game night coming up in October, so we'll be definitely featuring that game here that evening, and actually one of the sponsors for that night has actually given us I think 10 or 12 copies of the game to give out, so that's going to be interesting as well. So Ken, if people want to find out more about what you're doing today, how do they find you? Twitter, websites, anything like that you want to let us know about?
Probably the best way would be to use Twitter, and my ID on Twitter, my handle is Rogue Programmer, ROGUE Programmer, Programmer.
That's
Now,
a great handle.
Yeah, how'd you get that handle? I mean, that's pretty good to get that one, or you must have grabbed it early on.
Yeah, a long time ago, I got a nickname of Rogue just because my last name, Rogoway.
Okay,
and
yeah.
so it was a shortening of Rogoway. And
you
obviously
worked for
programming.
Epix, who had the Rogue software as well.
Exactly.
So that's a good connection.
It was like, well, that seemed like a good pick, and nobody had it, so I grabbed it.
Wow,
Awesome.
That's great.
And I will be tweeting info about the upcoming projects, kind of building, from the marketing side, building that during the development phase.
That's great.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, Ken, thank you so much for being on Lost Treasures of Gaming. We really appreciate your taking the time out to speak with us.
Sure. I enjoyed it. Feel free to get a hold of me, and I'll love to talk to you guys about anything else that I've worked on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Ken.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Wow, what a great interview with Ken.
It really was. And, this guy, it's amazing. He has worked on, like, two of the largest franchises that were part of my childhood. I mean, Ghostbusters and Star Wars. I mean, you throw in war games with this guy, and he's got, like, the perfect trifecta of the games and the movies that I loved as a kid.
That's your perfect three. I think for me, you'd have to throw in Star Trek, but I think we'd be hard-pressed to find a good one.
Well, there was some pretty good stuff on the PET, like circa 1977, in ASCII.
Well,
good, Star Trek in ASCII.
Yeah, if we want to set a record for our lost treasures, we're going to go back to Commodore PET.
Yeah.
Might be hard to find the people who worked on that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But there's always hope for a good Star Trek game in the future, and maybe we'll be talking about one of those in another episode.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know what, folks? We have a very awesome partnership with the folks over at Gaming History 101 at gaminghistory101.com. And every Friday night, Fred is going to use his Twitch stream channel to actually stream the very same game that we talk about. So this Friday night, visit twitch.tv/GH101, and you'll watch as Fred plays Ghostbusters to follow up this week's show. Of course, last week he played Rescue on Fractalus, and it was a really great show to watch him. He usually spends about 30 minutes doing it. So check it out every Friday night at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Hopefully he'll catch some ghosts.
I'm sure he's going to. And if you want to catch us, wherever we are, you can follow us on Twitter, this show specifically, at Lost Treasures OG. You have to put the OG because someone took the Lost Treasures Twitter handle 5 years ago, Sid, and has never used it.
Unbelievable.
So
we're using it, like, a lot. I mean, we're already at 5 episodes.
Exactly.
And they're, like, not using it at all.
But
sucks.
That's the way life goes, so we are Lost Treasures OG on Twitter. And of course, I am Ziantane on Twitter and everywhere.
And you can find me at Sid Bolton on Twitter. That's Sid with a Y, not an I. It's like Sydney, Australia. And if you want to send us an email, you can do that too. If you want to sort of send us some ideas, maybe for future episodes, future Lost Treasures, or if you want to send us, some free Steam codes or discount codes or just, a letter to say hi, you can do so at losttreasuresofgaming@gmail.com. And if you want to check the show notes, you maybe want to find a link to something that we talked about in this episode, then please do so at our website, which is omgnexus.com.
And of course, over at omgnexus.com, you'll find the other shows that we produce, which includes our mother show, the OMG Hour. If you want to find out what we're going to talk about right here on Lost Treasures of Gaming, be sure to check out the OMG Hour for a short preview of that, because there's always another buried classic to be found. So until next week, folks, this has been Lost Treasures of Gaming, episode number 5. Thanks for joining us.
See you soon.
This has been an OMGNexus.com production.